Okay, so in the early republic, one of the big things that is a hotly contested item is what is the role of the new nation going to be, the new government going to be, right? And as the government is growing and as the government is beginning to form, that is sort of the dominating question, particularly when we get after the Articles of Confederation, right? So you have the Articles of Confederation, which are the government from the beginning of the American Revolution, 1775, up until 1787, when it's officially dissolved and the new Constitution is written. When this new Constitution comes into play, the real question becomes sort of how are Americans, new Americans, going to operate, right? America is a new republic. America is a country that does not have a monarchy or an aristocracy. So, how are people and how is the government going to respond to this new type of existence? One of the things that becomes a really big question here, and this document I think goes to that, is what role is education going to play? So, Benjamin Rush, I've mentioned in class before. Benjamin Rush is a doctor, he's a physician in Philadelphia, but he's also a major political figure as well, right? This guy's like, he is um he really sort of makes an embarrassment of the rest of us, right? Not only is he a doctor, not only is he a sort of a political figure, he's a college founder, he writes massive amounts of political, social, economic, literary works. This guy is just a phenomenal, he's a genius. And he's not really well known today. At the time, though, he was. So Benjamin Rush writes a paper, and this comes in one of his collections of essays called "Essays on Politics, Economics, and Literature," something to that effect. And he writes, it's called "Of the Mode of Education Proper in a Republic." Now, again, if you look at the date, this is 1798. So this is 10 years after the new Constitution has been in effect, 15 years or more after the founding of the country, right? So what you have in this document, right, it talks about this idea of what do we need to know about being citizens, right? So this form of government, we assume, has created a new class of duties to every American, right? So this is a new style of government, and now all people have to sort of rise to that occasion. So this idea of what do people need to do becomes really significant. And you're going to see here that he asks for, and I said, as I point out, right, it says, our schools of learning, by producing one general and uniform system of education, will render the mass of people more homogeneous. So it'll make people similar, right? They'll have a common set of knowledge, and thereby fit them more easily for uniform and peaceable government, right? Again, this idea, if we can combine types of education, we can sort of open up, we can make America be more. This is also an idea that, like immigrants and people who have come to the United States, we can sort of give them what are our values. And in many ways, people still see education in that respect. The other piece to this, right, and again, if you think about this fear, and the documents today are really going to be looking at sort of how do we envision this new government. The other major thing that happens here in 1791 is the passage of the Bill of Rights, right? So for those of you who maybe don't know or don't remember, the Bill of Rights are 10 documents at the beginning of the Constitution. And these 10 amendments at the beginning of the Constitution establish things called positive rights and negative rights. Positive rights are rights to do something, and negative rights are rights from something, right? So if you look at this, so basically, whenever you can think of it as I have the right to do this, it's a positive right. Whenever it says I have the rights from this, protected from this, it's negative, right? So freedom of speech. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, prohibiting the exercise thereof. Right, I have the right to free religion. I have the right to freedom of speech or press. I have the right to do these things. Right to bear arms. I have the right to bear arms. No soldier. So this is a negative right. I don't have to have people in my house, soldiers in my house. Anyway, what I'm trying to show you here is, again, there's this fear over the government and sort of how people are going to interact with it and in it. And the purpose of establishing these 10 amendments very early on, right? The document itself is only ratified, the Constitution itself is only ratified in 1789. And then this is ratified in 1791, right? The fact that this happened so quickly shows you that there is still this massive fear over what's the government going to do, or how's the government going to act. So you can see that there's these establishment of protections that the newly formed citizens want to establish. So what I'm trying to show you here in these 4 documents and then in the lecture that you watched is that within the young United States, there is a lot of fear about the role of the government. And that, as you'll remember the lecture, that is going to create those first political parties, right? The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists wanting to have more power within the government, wanting to give more power to the federal government, while the Anti-Federalists want to limit that. So I think that's an important place to see this. And when you look at the amendments, let's see that. Hamilton, and the final 2 documents are from Hamilton. Hamilton is without a doubt a Federalist, right? He is George Washington's Secretary of the Treasury when George Washington is president, but he's also he's also George Washington's really right-hand man through much of the American Revolution. So he would be called what is called an aide-de-camp. He's an assistant, essentially, secretary. Hamilton is a major proponent of a strong federal government. So Hamilton, one of the first things that he does is absorbs the state's debts from the American Revolution. And the goal of doing that is not only just to establish America's line of credit, but it's also to sort of say that the United States will sort of be, the United States will pay off sort of the cost of getting its freedom. Now, how does he do this, right? One of the things that he does is he winds up selling bonds within the United States government to pay off that debt. So it's kind of an interesting strategy, right? Because by having the people who have money buying into this, right, you're now saying that those people have an invested interest in this government succeeding. So it's really an ingenious way of establishing that. So he encourages people to buy bonds in the government, and it helps establish this. So you can see here that he's arguing for a strong government and the constitutionality of the bank. The main proposition here laid down is that in its true signification, it is not to be questioned. It is nothing more than a consequence of the Republican maxim, that all government is a delegation of power. But how much is delegated in each case is a question of fact to be made out by fair reasoning and construction, right? So the question there, and he's sort of very plainly saying it, how much power are we delegating to the government? That's really the crux of the question. And then it says, is not denied that there are implied as well as expressed powers. So there are things that are given to us, but there are things that we are implying here and that we have to take. And that the former, that is the implied, are as effectually delegated as the latter, right? So the implied ones are just as much given as the expressed. So you can read this here, that there's the question of how do we establish this, and then finally he gets to return. And then it talks about is the implied powers are not to be considered as delegated equally with the express ones. Then it follows that the power acting in corporation may as well be implied as any other thing. So he's laying out here that we need to establish this bank and we have this power. Again, he's very nicely and very concisely laying out the Federalist position. Finally, the last document here is from Hamilton as well, about the Whiskey Rebellion, and I hope you'll remember from after reading the video, right, the Whiskey Rebellion is this event in Western Pennsylvania where people are rebelling against a tax that Hamilton is putting in, an excise tax, in order to raise money. Now, whiskey at this point is basically any grain that is distilled into liquor. People do this for a couple of reasons. One, it's so that you don't let your grain go to spoil. Two, it's a way, it acts as cash basically, right? If I have a jug of whiskey, I can then go maybe buy something else and I can barter my whiskey for it. So it's a way for people to turn, particularly rural people, particularly in Western Pennsylvania, to um, preserve their money. So in this, he talks about sort of the power of the government, the federal government that is, in putting down this rebellion and their right to enforce this new taxation. So you'll see that here. All right. Well, good luck, everybody, and I hope you're all well.